morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome you all to our presentation. This is ISO 9001:2015, Knowing What to Expect to Ensure a Stress-Free Audit. My name is Joe Krolikowski. I am the QMS Program Manager for PJR. Couple of notes for our participants today. All of you are on mute, but we absolutely want to address your questions. So we ask that if you have questions, go ahead and use the question portion of the dashboard. We will be addressing questions at the end of our presentation. One of the more common questions that we get is whether or not the presentation will be made available after we're finished. We do make our presentations available in two ways. First of all, if you'd like to get a copy of the slides, those will be available for download from our website shortly after we're finished. And if you'd like to rewatch this webinar with the voiceover, we do post all of our webinar recordings to our YouTube page. And the link for that can also be found on PJR's website. Now, our topics for today, we're going to talk a little bit about how this presentation came together and kind of the principles that it's rooted in, the fact that ISO 9001 is an interpretive document. We're going to explore some key areas of ISO 9001, some key concepts, and we're going to kind of unpack auditor expectations therein. We're going to have some discussion on some additional key areas that at the time were new when the 2015 version of the standard was published. We'll have a little bit of update on ISO 9001:2026, and then some concluding remarks and your questions. So let's begin with an important acknowledgement, and that is that ISO 9001 is an interpretive document. Now, you may not know this. When the 9001:2015 standard was published, it was actually the first version of ISO 9001 to include an explanatory appendix, the Appendix A. It has since become one of the only ISO published standards to have a whole separate supplemental standard for explanatory purposes. So let's take a minute and talk about that. That standard, or that document technically, is ISO TS 9002, which was published about a year after ISO 9001 was published. Now, ISO 9002's full title is Quality Management Systems Guidelines for the Application of ISO 9001. Now, this is, as I said, an officially sanctioned guidance document, and it provides clause-by-clause ideas on fulfilling the various requirements. Now, if we have anybody on our presentation today that remembers the old version of ISO 9004, the one that is at this point 25 years old, you will recognize the approach that was taken in the writing of the 9002 document. So, recognizing that ISO 9001 is an interpretive document, it is important for everybody to bear in mind that there are no perfect methods for implementing any of its requirements. It is up to the individual organization that is seeking ISO 9001 certification to figure out for itself how it wants to implement each of these various requirements. Now, the auditor's role in this, of course, is to review what the organization has done and exercise their judgment as to whether or not what the organization has done is truly a fulfillment of the requirement from ISO 9001. Now, one of the more interesting things that changed when the 2015 revision of ISO 9001 came out was the elimination of all procedural requirements. Now, if you dial the clock back to first and second edition, there were 16 required procedures at that time. Now, obviously, back then, that was the thinking that that was how you controlled an activity, was to have a procedure for it. Now, when we got to third and fourth edition, that got dialed back a bit. We went to only 6 required procedures. Now, in fifth edition, there are 0 required procedures. Now, having said that, if an organization chooses to have a procedure, and lots of them do, probably all of our clients have a procedure for something, you have to recognize that the content of that procedure can still be cited in the context of an audit. And that's based on the definition for audit criteria that comes from ISO 9000:2015. Audit criteria is understood as a set of policies, procedures, or requirements that are used as reference against which objective evidence is compared. So in other words, we can hold you accountable to your procedures and anything else that you write down if you choose to do so. Now, ISO 9001:2015 has been around over 10 years now. It was actually published in September of 2015. And ISO 9001 itself has been around for over 35 years. Now, despite that tenure, despite how long we've had an ISO 9001, a lot of the same things get written up year after year. Now, what we did to develop this presentation initially, back in 2018, we conducted a data mining exercise. We pulled about 350 audits from a 12-month period. Now, we have since repeated this exercise twice in the 7 years since this presentation was developed. And when you go through the data that we had, the following 5 general areas were the most commonly cited in terms of NCRs being written. Now, we're going to go through each of these over the next several slides here, but those 5 areas were management review meetings, internal audits, quality objectives, measurement devices, and external provider approvals. Now, it's important and interesting to note that 3 of these items, management review, internal audit, and calibration, 3 of these have been around since day one, going all the way back to 1987. These are not new requirements. These are not new expectations within ISO 9001, and yet they continue to get written up. So again, recognizing that we can't advocate specific methodologies on what to do. We can't tell your organization exactly what to do. What we can do is try to provide some clarity on what these requirements are commonly interpreted to mean and how they are commonly fulfilled. So what we're going to be looking at over the next several slides here, this is not an official endorsement of approach, and it can't be used as justification for any circumstance cited within a nonconformance. We are going to give some details on how to have an impartial resolution of disputed nonconformances a little bit later in our presentation. So let's start at the tippy top. Management review, the #1 most cited item in ISO 9001 nonconformances. Management review is found in section 9.3 of ISO 9001, and it has 3 subclauses, which we will refer to as parts. Part 1 is up at the top here. I've provided the language. I want to call out the reference in that verbiage to planned intervals. Now, they say management review has to occur at planned intervals. Now, it means that you have to have some manner of controlling the frequency and content of the management review meetings. Now, as to what those controls are going to be, well, that's up to you. We have seen things like internal schedules, procedures, automated reminders. Any of these things are going to be acceptable for meeting that aspect of planned intervals. But again, it's up to you to figure out what that is going to be. In part 2, we have a long list of things that are required to be discussed within the management review meeting. You have to talk about prior management reviews. You have to talk about internal audit results, external audit results, customer feedback, process performance, effectiveness of actions to address risk, and so forth. Now, each of those content items that we just looked at is mandatory, but it is not a requirement that every item be included in every management review. Now, some of our clients find it helpful to have some things be discussed at one meeting, and then maybe a month later have some other things be discussed, kind of eat the elephant in small bites, as it were. That's up to you. Some of our clients want to do everything at once and get it all done, and that's okay too. In terms of controlling the discussion, obviously a lot of our clients like to use PowerPoints. That's fine. It certainly makes it nice to look at when you're there for the audit. It's not mandatory. Some of our clients use a standardized agenda format to make sure that nothing is missed. Again, that's great, but it's not mandatory. The controls are going to be at your discretion. The last part of the management review requirement says that management review needs to lead to decisions and actions. And also that you have to retain documented information. That's a key phrase there. That means you have to have records. I want to talk about both of these parts. First of all, you have to have records of the management review meeting. Now, again, what format those records take and how they're rendered, completely up to your organization. But you have to be able to put something in front of your auditor to prove that the management review took place. Secondly, the management review meeting needs to be productive. It needs to lead to decisions and actions, or you could even think of it as conclusions. It's not supposed to just be a churn of information. Now, we've trained our auditors to review the management review minutes and look at those decisions and actions, and if possible, to try to follow audit trails. For most of our clients, management review meeting is going to be the very first thing that gets looked at because it's ripe with trails and opportunities for things to be looked at later as part of the audit. Okay, let's shift to the second most cited item, the internal audit. Internal audit is found in section 9.2, and it is split into two subclauses. First of all, you'll note that it talks again about planned intervals. Internal audits need to come at planned intervals. I want to also point out this next bit of verbiage to provide information on whether the quality management system conforms to requirements as well as the requirements of the international standard. So let's unpack what all of that means. Again, planned intervals means some sort of scheduling mechanism. Now again, up to you. Could be a calendar trigger, could be some sort of database scheduling, could be some audit plans that are issued at the beginning of the year, but there has to be something. It can't just be an accidental event. You are allowed to conduct the audit in small bites if you so desire, just like the management review. If you want to audit one process a month and kind of go in a rotation, great. That's absolutely a satisfactory way to go about the requirement. Now, I want to point out again this verbiage of auditing the requirements of this international standard. You are obligated to audit all of the requirements from ISO 9001, everything from sections 4 through 10. A common mistake that we see is not auditing the internal audit process itself. Yes, you are indeed required to audit the audit, so bear that in mind. Another item I want to dial back to, this business of auditing against the quality management system. Bear in mind, ISO 9001 indicates that a quality management system is made up of processes. This comes from section 441 in the second paragraph. I've actually quoted it here on the screen. So understand that our expectation is going to be that your internal audits are structured around your processes and not the clauses of ISO 9001 itself. It is not supposed to be a clausal audit. It is supposed to be a process audit. Now, the second part of the internal audit requirement from ISO 9001 includes some other requirements that are key. First of all, I want to point out that you need to ensure that your auditors are going to be objective and impartial. We'll unpack that in a minute. You need to make sure that you are taking appropriate correction and corrective action for nonconformances that come up in your internal audit. And again, just like we had under management review, you need to retain documented information as evidence of the implementation. So again, the internal audit is something that is supposed to be on the record. So let's unpack some of these a bit. Firstly, you'll note that ISO 9001 does not specify any kind of minimum requirement for internal audit or competency. Just like any other task within your organization, it is entirely up to you what it means to be competent to perform an internal audit. So if that means that they are going to an auditor school, if they are going to a self-study type of deal, an online course, whatever the case may be, it's up to you to decide how that's going to be accomplished, how the auditor is going to attain the competency. And you do need to be prepared to show records of how you made that happen. Now, an issue that seems to come up on occasion with internal audits is a lack of responding to internal audit nonconformances. Now, the intent is that you are going to treat those nonconformances in the same respect as you would a nonconformance from PJR or, say, a customer complaint. Now, as we pointed out, the requirement specifically mentions both correction and systemic corrective action in this context. And again, you do have to have records of your internal audit. Now, as to what those records are going to look like, totally up to the organization. It could be checklists, it could be procedural printouts, it could be some sort of internal audit database, but whatever it is you choose to retain as evidence of the internal audits, it needs to be sufficiently detailed to give confidence that the entire quality management system was included. And please note, that means recording evidence of conformity in addition to evidence of nonconformity. So you want to try to capture the who, what, when, where, etc. that was seen during the internal audit as best you are able. Now, I want to talk very briefly about consultants. A lot of our clients choose to outsource their internal audit program to a consultant, and that's perfectly okay. Obviously, it's helpful. It's good to have some help with a requirement like this. You have to remember, though, that regardless of who does the audit, the responsibility for the audit program belongs to you, the organization. It's not your consultant. It's your program. It's your name on the certificate, right? So that means it is your internal audit program, and you should be able to speak confidently about how it's controlled, how it's recorded, etc. Your answer should not be, you need to talk to my consultant. Your answer should be, yes, I do know about my internal audit program, and let me tell you about it. Moving on to the third most cited item, quality objectives. Now, quality objectives as a requirement are found in section 6.2. Now, this requirement is actually split into two subclauses. In part one, it establishes a couple of key things. Firstly, that quality objectives need to be measurable. They need to be relevant to your products and services. They need to aim to enhance customer satisfaction, and they need to be monitored, communicated, and updated as appropriate. So let's talk about a few of these things. First of all, this business of they have to be measurable. If there is no measurability, there's no way for us or you to know if the objective was met. Now, obviously, the preference here is for variable type objectives, you know, the current rate of on-time delivery or the current measured level of scrap, etc. Those are obviously what most folks go with as far as their quality objectives. But it is absolutely okay to have what you would call attribute type objectives. So an example of an attribute objective, to say that you want to achieve NatCap accreditation. Well, either you've got it or you don't. It's kind of a pass-fail type situation. So those types of objectives are okay too. The key is that they have to be measurable. Now, relevancy to customer satisfaction in products and services. This was a new concept when ISO 9001:2015 was published. Now, it's important to note that if you have objectives that are rooted in things like profitability or safety, that's fine, but you need to make sure that you have other objectives that are rooted in things like customer satisfaction and product and service conformance. Now, you have to remember that quality objectives are a topic that everybody in the organization is going to be expected to know about. This is something that's right up there with quality policy, something we can ask about at any point in the audit to any person that we're interviewing. And so you need to consider what is necessary to make sure that the objectives are communicated, whether that's having meetings or placing placards, etc. Again, it's entirely up to you how that's going to be accomplished. The second part of the requirement says that you need to determine what will be done. And that's actually kind of fleshed out a bit in the ISO 9002 guidance document. It says that you should determine the actions that need to be implemented to achieve your quality objectives. And what that means, what we take away from that is it's not enough to just have the objectives. You need to be tracking a progress achieved towards your objectives, and you need to take action to improve objectives performance if you're not meeting them. So it can't just be, oh, well, we didn't get there. No, you need to be taking necessary action. Now, that means an appropriate response. It doesn't necessarily mean formal corrective action, but it means that you're attempting to do something about this underperforming objective. Let's move on to number 4, monitoring and measuring resources. Now, this requirement is most typically referred to as calibration. And this is going to refer to any device, tool, gauge, meter, scale, etc., that is used to perform monitoring and measurement of outputs. Now, most organizations refer to this as inspection and testing. And this requirement comes from section 7.1.5, which again has 2 subparts. Firstly, it says that you need to determine and provide the resources. In other words, it's up to you to figure out what your measurement resources are going to be. We're not going to tell you what test devices are needed, but they do need to be fit for purpose, they need to be suitable, they need to be appropriate. And you need to retain appropriate documented information as to fitness for purpose. So in other words, that these are acceptable for the measurements that you're taking. Now, the primary requirement that gets emphasized during audits is this business of retaining documented information for fitness for purpose. Now, for most organizations, that's going to manifest in the calibration records for all of your measurement devices. Now, the content of those records is then influenced by the second part of this requirement. So let's talk about that. There's a lot of verbiage here, but I want to point out kind of the key parts. Your measurement devices need to be calibrated or verified at specified intervals or prior to use against measurement standards that are traceable to international or national measurement standards. Your measurement devices also need to be identified in order to determine their status. Now, those are the 2 key parts of the requirement here. So, and the 2 most often violated parts of that requirement. First of all, this business of traceability to national or international standards. Now, here in the United States, that's going to be the National Institute of Standards and Technology, the NIST. So if you review a calibration certificate, you'll see what we call the NIST number, the NIST number. If we see that on the certificate, that means that the calibrating laboratory, the authority, they have looked at your device and they have confirmed that it is traceable to the national standards that are established by the NIST in Washington. Now, in rare circumstances where an NIST traceable method is not available, and again, that's very rare, it is considered acceptable for the calibration to be performed by the device manufacturer. Now, consistent and reliable identification is the other item that we see get violated a lot. Now, yes, your measurement devices need to be labeled. No, they do not need to be labeled with calibration stickers. This is a persisting falsehood that we still hear about from time to time. They need to be labeled in such a way that they are traceable and that their status, their calibration status, can be determined. You can do that with a calibration sticker, yes, but you can also do that with some sort of device number. You can use the serial number on the device that came from the manufacturer if you are so inclined. But again, that methodology is going to be up to you, just like everything else we've looked at. Our fifth and final most common cited item is external provider approvals. Now, if you dial the clock back to the older versions of the standard, these folks were referred to as suppliers, subcontractors, outside partners, what have you. And in the older versions of ISO 9001, the requirements that were applied to these types of folks were sort of scattered throughout the standard. Now, all of those terms got merged in the 2015 version of ISO 9001 under the collective term external provider. But the requirement is not new, and it can currently be found in the third paragraph of section 8.4.1. So let's take a look at that requirement. You shall determine and apply criteria for the evaluation, selection, monitoring of performance, and reevaluation of your external providers, and you shall retain documented information of these activities, plural. And I'm going to point out why that's important in a second here. Now, you are required to establish a methodology to approve your external providers. Now, what that methodology is, totally up to you. Some organizations require certification, some will do a site visit, some will have a test purchase, whatever the case may be, it is ultimately up to you. You'll note that the requirement calls for monitoring and reevaluation. It's not a set it and forget it kind of deal. You're supposed to do ongoing monitoring of supplier performance as well. Lastly, I pointed out this business of retain documented information of these evaluation activities. That means that having the external provider's name on a list is not evidence of evaluation, and it doesn't constitute a record of the evaluation activity. So the list by itself is not going to be enough. We need to see some evidence of how you did this evaluation. So bear that in mind. Okay, so moving beyond the most common areas cited during audits, I do want to talk about two other not so new areas. These were things that were new at the time that the 2015 version of the standard was published, and they had the most impact on our clients and on what was getting looked at during the audit. And this was risk and interested parties. Let's start with risk. The term risk is actually used 16 times in the auditable portion of ISO 9001 2015. Now, it is viewed as a system-wide strategy. In other words, risk is supposed to impact various areas of the ISO 9001 standard, and therefore the quality management system itself. ISO 9002 defines key risks as the failure of processes, products, and services to meet requirements, or the organization not achieving customer satisfaction, kind of the ultimate key risk, not taking care of the customer. It is pointed out, however, as I've mentioned in bullet 3 here, that you do not have to have a formal risk management process. That has never been the expectation, and it's even written into the standard in Annex A that you don't have to have a formal risk management process. The risk requirement, it appears primarily in Section 6, and it talks about when you are planning for your system, you need to consider the issues that are referred to in 4.1, which means both internal and external issues, and the requirements from 4.2, and that means the requirements coming from internal and external interested parties, and determine the risks and opportunities that need to be addressed. To first of all, give assurance that your system can achieve its intended result, to enhance desirable effects and reduce undesirable effects, and ultimately to achieve improvement. So there's a few things going on here. We recognize that this thought process is going to help us avoid bad stuff and also potentially to identify good stuff, if I can use some common phraseology here. So we want this to be something that we're doing that has a positive overall impact on the quality management system. In 6.1.2, it says that you shall plan actions to address risks and opportunities, and you shall plan how to implement and integrate these actions into your processes, and then evaluate the effectiveness of those actions. Now, what do they mean by actions to address risks and opportunities? Well, again, we can turn to 9002 for some guidance on what these actions might look like. In 9002, it says you might avoid the risk. You could stop doing the activity in question. You can limit the risk. You can do things like write procedures, write work instructions to try to reduce the likelihood of whatever it is you're trying to avoid. You can share the risk. This might be, for example, working with your customer on a bulk buy of raw material. You can transfer the risk. This might be something like, for example, maintaining insurance through an outside provider. And ultimately, when you've done all of those things and explored all of the possibilities, accepting the risk that is left and telling yourself that that is the amount of risk that you will have to bear with. So how do we audit all this? How does PJR approach this? Well, we have trained our auditors basically to take a very open-minded approach with this. We start with a question. How are you addressing risks? How have you addressed these requirements within your quality management system? We expect our clients to understand the concept and to be prepared to explain what their approach has been. Now, it's important to point out that there's really only one requirement in ISO 9001 that talks about records being retained of this. And it's in section 9.3, which ties it to management review, where it says that the effectiveness of actions taken to address risks and opportunities needs to be included in the management review process. And it goes on to say, of course, that you need to keep records of your management reviews. So that's really the only place where the risk actions themselves are going to be on the record. So please bear that in mind. Now, the definition of interested parties. Let's shift concepts here and talk about interested parties. It's an interesting definition. This comes from Annex A of ISO 9001 itself. It's a person or organization that can be affected by, or perceive themselves to be affected by a decision or activity. Now, the examples that are given in Appendix A are some of the more obvious ones: customers, owners, people within the organization, suppliers, etc. Now, in clause 4.2 of ISO 9001, it says that your organization needs to determine who your relevant interested parties are, but it emphasizes you need to figure out who are the relevant interested parties to your quality management system. Now, the idea is that you're going to make sure that your quality management system is considering all relevant input requirements. Now, that term, even interested party, it's meant to broaden the scope of who those requirements might be coming from. You know, obviously making sure you're cognizant of applicable requirements is good business. That's the thought process. Now, one point that we have tried to emphasize over the years with this requirement, it is most likely, not definitely, but most likely going to be inappropriate for an organization to conclude that their only interested party group is their customer base. Now, if an organization comes to us and says, our customers are the only relevant interested party, well, we will potentially accept that, but we're going to ask about it. We're going to say, well, okay, what process did you follow to come to that conclusion? Now, if they can't talk their way through it, if they can't show us that this was done via a structured analysis, it's possible that this was a flawed selection and possible that we're going to be issuing a nonconformance for it. Now, as to who else might be an interested party, we mentioned some possibilities just a few minutes ago, but let's pull up the list from ISO 9002. And this kicks it out to some very long-ranging possibilities here. We have competitors, government groups, statutory, regulatory, external providers, unions, and so forth. Lots of possibilities on who might be an interested party. So how should you figure out what your interested parties want? Well, again, we can refer to some guidance from ISO 9002. This is going to include everything from reviewing the orders that you received, looking at requirements through compliance or legal departments, having benchmarking, market surveillance, customer surveys, benchmarking, and so forth. Lots of these things you should already be doing. Now, what nonconformances are possible pertaining to interested parties? Well, there are two circumstances where a nonconformance is likely going to be appropriate. First of all, if there is no evidence or limited evidence of an implemented process for monitoring and reviewing information, that's going to represent a violation of Section 4.2. Secondly, if there is no evidence that you are discussing interested party feedback within management review, that would represent a violation of Section 932C1. There is one more thing I'd like to discuss relevant to ISO 9001:2015, and that is the requirements from Section 5.1 that pertain to leadership. Now, our audit report has several targeted questions that our auditors are supposed to ask the management team under the heading of leadership interview. Now, the audit report directs our auditors to make sure that your leadership is directly involved in the management of your quality system. So what are we asking during this leadership interview? Well, I've provided the actual questions here on screen. First of all, what are you specifically doing to make yourself accountable for the effectiveness of your system? How do you participate in your system? Who are your primary interested parties? Do you have a process in place for monitoring interested party requirements? And what are some current internal and external issues that you are dealing with? These are all things that your leadership team should be comfortable answering. Now, understand that our expectation in most circumstances is going to be leadership means multiple people. It becomes, especially in a situation where we're talking about any company that's more than just a few people. You know, obviously a 3-person company, a 4-person company, okay. Leadership conceivably could be a single person. But once we start getting into 10, 15, 25, 45 people, really, there's only one person that constitutes leadership? We start to question that. We start to challenge you on that. Now, again, we can look to ISO 9002 for guidance on what leadership means. It states that although certain authorities and responsibilities can be delegated, accountability remains with top management. So yes, you can have an ISO lead. You can have someone who acts as the primary responsible person for your ISO 9001 system. But you still have to have management involved in what's going on with that quality management system. So what happens if we don't agree? Well, as we've been talking about these various requirements, as I've said, it is an interpretive document, and your auditor may be looking at things differently from how you are. One of the things that we're required to do as an accredited certification body is to provide a process for an impartial review of contested nonconformances. Now, in our case, we refer to these as a dispute request, and it is explained in our procedure Pro 10. Now, if you'd like to get a copy of Pro 10, you can download it from our website. Just go to the bottom of the page, the home page, and look for the link entitled Registration Document Download. You can get a copy of Pro 10 and read up on our dispute process. We actually have a whole separate webinar that goes over the disputes process. That webinar is called Your Ongoing Relationship with PJR. That webinar will be shown again early in 2026, and there are past recordings of it available on our YouTube page if you'd like to review it there. So ISO 9001:2015 is still the world's most utilized management system standard. There are just over 900,000 registered companies worldwide. Now, many of the items that are cited, as we've hopefully shown, are entirely avoidable, and yet they come up time and time again. We do hope that the content of our presentation today will leave you feeling more confident that things will go well on audit day. Now, if you're ready for a deeper dive, we do have a clause-by-clause primer course for anyone that is new to ISO 9001:2015 and wants to have a better understanding in preparation for audit or for other purposes. If you go to our website at www.pgr.com, look for the training link, and you will find the ISO 9001:2015, a clause-by-clause analysis course. It is completely free, and anybody in your organization can take it. Now, I'd like to very briefly give everybody an update on what's going on with ISO 9001:2026. You're probably wondering when it's going to be coming out. As of right now, we do not have a firm publication date for ISO 9001:2026. We have very little information about it that is firm. Right now, the new standard is in what's called the DIS, or Draft International Standard phase. And that means that there's actually potential for change prior to the final version being published. For that reason, we're holding off on presenting anything from a training perspective. Now, once we get to the FDIS phase, the final Draft International Standard, we will be rolling out some training material and bringing everybody up to date on the new standard. So we do ask that you hang in there with us just a little bit longer. We're expecting the FDIS to be published sometime in the first quarter next year. If you'd like to tune in for one of our other webinars, we'd love to have you. We have a wonderful presentation on exemptions and what can and cannot be excused in an audit assessment. We've got a very popular webinar on the interaction of processes and how to build up your listing of processes. And we've got webinars on a wide variety of other topics, things like corrective action, stage 1 auditing, IETF 16949, and so forth. If you'd like to be kept informed of the latest news automatically, the very best way for you to do that is to visit our website at www.pgr.com. Go to the bottom of the page and enter your email address in the provided space and click subscribe. You will be opted in for automatic updates on new webinars, changes to the standard, and other points of helpful information. I do thank you for your time. I'm going to go ahead and unlock the question portion of the dashboard. As a reminder, we do have copies of the slides that'll be available for download shortly after we're finished. And if you'd like to rewatch this webinar, it will be posted to our YouTube page. So do we have any questions here? Any questions at all? Okay, very good. Well, wishing everyone a great holiday season, and we'll see you in 2026.